Weighing in on the Gulf crisis yet again, the US Secretary of State says some of the demands on Qatar are difficult to meet. Rex Tillerson is calling for dialogue. But can the US push the countries blockading Qatar to tone down their pressure? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Seeker. On Friday, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain and Egypt gave Qatar 10 days to comply with a list of 13 demands to resolve the Gulf crisis. It includes shutting down this network and aligning Qatar's foreign policy with that of the GCC, among other demands. Qatar has rejected the list, saying it violates its sovereignty. Meanwhile, the US is calling on all sides to sit down and talk. The statement from Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says while some of the elements will be very difficult for Qatar to meet, there are significant areas which provide a basis for ongoing dialogue leading to resolution. A productive next step would be for each of the countries to sit together and continue this conversation. We believe our allies and partners are stronger when they are working together towards one goal, which we all agree is stopping terrorism and countering extremism. Well, Tillerson also encouraged the countries to lower their rhetoric to ease the tension. So what role is the US playing in resolving the Gulf crisis? Well, James Bays has more from Washington.
This is the first official statement from the State Department since that list of 13 demands was presented to Qatar. The only other statement from the administration was some brief words by the press secretary Sean Spicer on Friday when he said it was a family matter that he wanted resolved as quickly as possible. It's worth reminding you that before the countries that are blockading Qatar presented their demands, the State Department said that those demands should be actionable and reasonable. And it's worth pointing out that in this new statement it says while some of the elements will be very difficult for Qatar to meet, there are significant areas which provide a basis for ongoing dialogue, suggesting to me that the State Department does believe that some of those 13 demands are not actionable or reasonable. The State Department says it wants all of the countries to sit down and talk about this further. It's praising the efforts of Kuwait as a mediator, but of course Kuwait has been involved in mediation since the very beginning of this crisis, and I don't think this statement really brings anything new that can help resolve the situation, although of course the State Department has made it clear from the beginning it wants to see this row ended as quickly as possible, in part because of the strategic importance of Qatar hosting the US's biggest military base, air base in the Middle East at a time when the US led efforts to retake Raqqa in Syria and Mosul in Iraq are at a crucial phase.
One of the GCC demands is that Qatar immediately shut down the Turkish military base, which is under construction, and halt military cooperation with Turkey inside Qatar. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan had this to say.
Demanding that Turkey pull its soldiers is disrespectful towards Turkey. Are we supposed to seek permission anytime we make defense cooperation agreements with the country? We believe the list of demands contradicts international law, because there shouldn't be this kind of attack on state sovereignty. But that's what we are seeing here.
Iran's President Hassan Rouhani also reacted to the demands on Qatar. The Gulf nations are demanding that Qatar reduce its diplomatic ties and cut off military and intelligence cooperation with Iran. But Rouhani has told Qatar's emir that Tehran will stand by Qatar's government. Iran's airspace, ground and sea will always be open to Qatar as a friendly nation. Well, let's bring in our guest now. Joining us here in Doha is Abdulaziz Al-Hor, CEO of the Qatar Finance and Business Academy. In Istanbul, we had Ahmed Alburai, lecturer at Istanbul Aydin University. And from Washington, Hilary Mann Leverett, a former White House and State Department official. Good to have you all with us. So, Hilary Mann Leverett, if I could start with you. What do you make then of this latest statement from the US Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson? Will it do anything to calm these tensions down?
Well, I think it depends on your perspective of how you want things calmed down. I think the statement by Secretary Tillerson, in my view, unfortunately, is a walk back to where we were maybe even a week or two ago when President Trump in the Rose Garden said that Qatar was going to have to make hard but necessary decisions, that the U.S. support of the Saudi and Emirati position was hard but necessary. And I think that Secretary Tillerson's statement, June 25th statement, is really a reversion back to that position and shows how much the White House controls this issue, notwithstanding some of Secretary Tillerson's prior statements that may have been more sympathetic to Qatar, more sympathetic to a negotiated settlement.
Abdulaziz Al-Hor, what do you read from this statement?
Hazem, first let me just stress that this list of demand is an official list of demand. Neither party has released the official list, but nobody even denied the list. So what we're talking about, or what we're discussing, are speculations, need to be taken with some cautious. But my concern that the White House and Pentagon and State of Department and the U.S. position related to the crisis has not been consistent. So the inconsistency is there for the last 3-4 weeks. From one side, the White House is accusing Qatar and openly accusing Qatar of funding terrorism. Pentagon is appreciating Qatar and considering Qatar as a strategic partner against terrorism. The State of Department is playing in the middle ground, trying to hold the stick from the middle. Therefore, I don't think that the U.S. is really qualified to end this crisis in a very stable, very, I would say, right approach.
Ahmed Alburai, where do you see Turkey's role in all of this right now?
Turkey basically is looking at this rift as a matter of a geopolitical change in the whole region. This comes, the rift that happens between the two states or the three states, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi from the one hand, and from the other hand Qatar, is coming through the agenda of these countries that they're trying to impose a different program for the whole region, which Turkey doesn't see consistent with the views of both Qatar from the one hand and Turkey from the other hand. The problem is that they're trying to forcibly impose this new agenda on both countries, disregarding the concerns and the independence or the sovereignty of these two states. Turkey doesn't see that the GCC is taking into account their concerns about a Kurdish statelet that is about to be allowed on the north of Syria. On the other hand, Qatar is seeing that they're completely disregarding Qatar's concerns about the whitewashing of Bashar al-Assad, bringing him back to the political arena as if he's done nothing, and the things are going to move smoothly regardless of the bloodshed, regardless of the carnage, the much carnage he committed against his own people. So they're trying to put more pressure on the country, on Qatar, and Turkey is not going to allow this happen. That was very clear with the checkmate move when Turkey decided immediately over one night to redeploy more soldiers and increase its existence in Qatar, sending clear messages not only for the GCC but also for the White House that we are not going to leave or to let you isolate and ostracize Qatar, because if this happened, the consequences and the ramifications are going to be seriously difficult for Turkey, not only to Qatar itself.
Hilary Mann-Leverett, just to come back to what Abdulaziz Al-Hor was saying about the different statements that are coming out of the various departments in the United States. The State Department says one thing, the White House says something else. If the feeling is that Washington is not speaking with one voice on this, what implications is that going to have for this dispute going forward?
I think, there is a tendency, I think, both in Washington and outside of the United States, to dismiss these kind of conflicting statements out of the Trump administration as some sort of incoherence and incompetence. But in reality, I think we should take it much more seriously. This was something that I think people underestimated then candidate Trump through the entire presidential campaign here and have underestimated him since he took the presidency. I think he has clearly stated that his strategy is to keep people on their toes, is to keep them guessing, that he has strong views, he has a clearly identified strategy in his own brain that can be affected by others' views and point of views, and he takes them seriously. For example, on the climate change treaty, even his own daughter was against the United States pulling out of the climate change treaty. Secretary of State Tillerson was against pulling out of the climate change treaty. And President Trump let people believe for a while that he was actually weighing their views and letting them basically make their best arguments. I think you see the same thing happening here. President Trump is letting his cabinet ministers and members of his family, like Jared Kushner, for example, make their best arguments. But I think at the end, he has his own strategy. And his strategy is what he has said, which is that Qatar needs to make fundamental changes, basically get on board with what President Trump sees as U.S. leadership in the Middle East, and give President Trump what he wants, which is a victory in what he sees, how he describes the war against terrorism and ISIS, which, for others of us who are more objective analysts and analysts of the Middle East, of geopolitics, this may not comport with our own views. It doesn't comport with my view personally, but I think it's a mistake to think that Trump does not have a strategy. His strategy is very much to show that the U.S. is back in charge in the Middle East with some strong partners like the Saudis and the Emiratis, and Qatar is going to be, should be, in his view, sacrificed for that greater goal of showing a victory of the U.S. standing tall with leaders in the Arab world. It's not something I agree with, but I think it is a real strategy coming out of the Trump White House.
Abdulaziz, if what Hillary's saying there is right, then how should Qatar be looking at this? Does anything that Mr. Tillerson says really matter in all of this?
Actually, my concern that if you look at the list of the 13 items, you see that most of them are really targeting the sovereignty of the country, actually limiting the sovereignty of the country and outsourcing the foreign policy of Qatar, how to deal with Turkey, how to deal with Iran, even in the terrorism. Who said that the blockade countries are the point of reference for terrorism? What is terrorism? Who is the terrorist groups? What is funding and what are the terrorist organization? From one side, they are considering, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood as terrorists. Tillerson himself, that he said we cannot just label Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist group. So my concern that the point of reference is lost here. We have to really agree on what is the point of reference in everything. I mean, to shape the relationship with countries, this is like the sovereignty of any country and the independence of any countries to decide how to deal and how to partner with other countries, to whom to give asylum, to whom to give nationality and not to give nationality, to form a follow-up team and mechanism for 10 years. So most of these points are to the heart of the sovereignty of this country and the independence of this country. Therefore, I think these points are very, very difficult to meet, although Qatar has said that we will review the list, we will think about it, and we will send the official reply to Kuwaitis who are mediating in the middle. Therefore, I'm not sure that what Tillerson is asking Qatar to do, what kind of sacrifice is Donald Trump is asking Qatar, or what kind of hard decision Qatar has to make, because there is a mix of messages here, mix of stories. The bottom of the whole crisis, in my opinion, is the sovereignty and independence of this country, plus that redefinition of the centers of power in the whole region. Therefore, they are after the freedom of speech. They are after Al Jazeera. What Al Jazeera has to do with the crisis if the issue is the terrorism or the Iran or Turkey? Therefore, these mixed messages does not really make it easier on Qatar or even on the both parties to sit on the table with a clear, transparent dialogue to end this crisis.
Ahmed Alburai, 2 days after these demands were released, the Turkish president reiterated his support for Qatar and called these demands as being against international law. So it would seem that this has had the effect of bringing Turkey and Qatar closer together, which would be the opposite of what this Saudi-led coalition is trying to do, isn't it?
For Turkey, again, what is the most important thing? President Erdogan always reiterating that Turkey is not trying to take any side. What is important is the stability of the whole region. Having the GCC bloc as one stabilized entity is in favor of Turkey and the whole region. The whole region is already in an unprecedented turmoil, in a very tumultuous environment where nobody is trying to act. So we are not keen to see another turmoil in the Gulf countries. For Turkey, again, it is unacceptable that to leave country like Qatar that supported them, unequivocally supported Turkey after the coup of July 15th, 2016. They're not going to let them ostracize Qatar. This is from the one hand. From the other hand, the two countries are two independent countries who have the right to practice their sovereign powers by having a military deals, where that deal was in 2015, where they have the military base in Qatar. And even President Erdogan told the king himself yesterday, he reiterated this, that if the kingdom itself is interested in having a base in Saudi Arabia, Turkey is ready to do that. So the point is not to taking any side of this, but you as a Gulf country, as a Gulf bloc, should also respect the other countries and should also show some respect to Turkey as a big regional power in the region. That's from the one hand. From the other hand, a very important point for Turkey is that they believe that their soft power is not enough to stabilize and to extend their arms in the region in a matter to serve their own national security here in Turkey. The proactive measures that happened militarily, starting by the Euphrates Shield operation, is now enhanced by more proactive measures. Yesterday, President Erdogan said clearly and bluntly that Turkey, with its military, with the army, with every organization in the government, they're not going to allow a statelet for the Kurdish militias in the north of Syria. On the other hand, they're saying to the Gulf countries, yeah, you're able to withdraw your deals, your economic ties with Turkey, you can downsize them, but still Turkey is a powerful country. You cannot practice this kind of blackmailing, or you cannot at least make use of its relations with Qatar in order to weaken the stances of Turkey in the region. That's why Turkey is very vehement on its stances related to this rift in the region.
Hilary Mann-Liwert, if what you were saying earlier that this may be part of a deliberate strategy on the part of the U.S. government to put out these different opinions, then whose opinion is President Trump likely to listen to most? Is it Tillerson? Is it the Defense Secretary Mattis? Is it Jared Kushner? I mean, who's likely to have his ear?
Within the White House, you have some people who I would maybe call ultra-nationalists, someone like Steve Bannon, who I think still has a very powerful and important voice within the White House. But again, I think this is really President Trump, his own initiative, excuse me, It was his initiative to make his first foreign trip as U.S. president to Saudi Arabia, an unprecedented move by a U.S. president. And I think it was very deliberate to show the American public and international publics that notwithstanding or even because of President Trump's very poor treatment of and disparaging of Muslims during the U.S. presidential campaign, that maybe even because of that, he was going to go to the heart of the Muslim world, to Saudi Arabia, and be welcomed there as a king himself, and be able to speak to Muslim leaders and tell them about Islam, and that they would then follow him in his quest against ISIS. This is very much of a public relations political victory for President Trump here in the United States, and I think that he believes more broadly. I think it's really dangerous to underestimate that kind of political, even crass political calculation by the president himself. But then I think if you take what other voices are saying here in Washington, for example, the ambassador of the United Arab Emirates spoke to journalists here in Washington a week ago and was asked about Secretary Tillerson's comments, particularly his one comment that he was astonished that the Emirates and Saudi Arabia had not come up yet with their list of demands for Qatar. And Ambassador Otaiba, the Emirati ambassador here, said, well, the State Department is not really important to listen to. They're not the power center. So I think there is very much of a strategy coming from the White House that will allow Secretary Tillerson and Secretary of Defense Mattis to make their best arguments. But their best arguments will have to overcome the the political prize that I think President Trump sees by aligning himself with what he sees as strong new leadership out of Saudi Arabia and the Emirates to join together in some sort of U.S. Arab Muslim initiative that welcomes American power back to the Middle East. It is very much of a crass political calculation, and Qatar is just, something that has to be sacrificed, I think, in his view, along the way. It's not important to the Trump administration who actually leads Qatar. So this question of sovereignty is not something, that we should necessarily see that the White House takes so seriously. Whoever rules Qatar and allows the U.S. to have their air base there, that's fine, I think, in terms of the Trump administration's perspective.
Let's talk about that more with Abdulaziz Al-Hor. The U.S., very large U.S. air base that the U.S. military has here in Qatar. Where does that fit into all of this? Is this one of the best, the best defense that Qatar has in all of this?
Actually, if I just comment on what Hillary just has said, even in Donald Trump visit to Riyadh, he literally said, Qatar is a strategic partner against terrorism. This is Donald Trump. This is his own statement actually talking about Qatar. So what is his position? Is Qatar a strategic partner against terrorism or not? He is giving also these conflicting messages. I wish that he was really clear and consistent throughout. So even with Donald Trump himself, I'm not sure that what is his message and his position. So he's making everybody is confused. Maybe this is a new strategy. Therefore, I call this in the United States, this is uncertain leadership era. So
he was then, sorry, just to jump in, he was then reminded that there is a U.S. air base in Qatar, and there were some reports that said he didn't even know that.
I will not be surprised if this is the case. Now, related to the U.S.-based military base in Qatar, as Hillary said, this cannot be touched. This is untouchable base, actually. For us, we don't depend on the U.S. military base to defend Qatar, actually. We have to have our own measure, our own actions, our own measures to protect ourselves and to position ourselves. And there was never been in the vision of this country that this base is to protect Qatar. This is for the stabilization of the whole region, not to use this military base against anybody. So we don't trust and we don't think that this military base can be trusted to protect Qatar or to really do anything like this.
All right, we've got to leave it there. Thanks very much, Abdulaziz Al-Hor, Ahmed Alburai in Istanbul, and Hilary Mann Leverett in Washington. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you.
And thank you too for watching. Remember, you can see this program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Hazem Sika, and the whole team here, bye for now.